It's recording. Thank you.
Yes, great. And there was one other thing.
Jerry,
And I wanted to remind you, you all know the deal. If you think of questions while Don's talking, please just put it in the chat and we'll get back to it at the end. Thank you very much, everybody.
Jerry, are you going to mute all the participants? Okay, it seems to be muted.
Sorry, I was on mute. I'm doing that right now, Don.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the third of 4 lectures on the life and times of Alexander Hamilton. Hopefully, by now, you've had a chance to see the musical production on Disney Plus, or perhaps you have seen it in person. So last night, we took a look at Hamilton's role as Secretary of the Treasury and writing this report on credit that encapsulated his financial program. And we're about to listen to one of the songs in the musical called Take a Break, but I couldn't locate it. And so I thought that was a good time to take a break and end the lecture. So we'll begin with that. So in this song, we're introduced to Hamilton's son, Philip, who was 9 years old in 1791. And the song also encourages Hamilton to spend quality time with his family. And it also hints at Hamilton's complicated relationship with his sister-in-law, Angelica. So we're going to listen to that right now. It's called Take a Break.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 7, 8, 9. 7, 8, 9. 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
My dearest Angelica, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. I trust you'll understand the reference to another Scottish tragedy without my having to name the play. They think me Macbeth, ambition is my folly. I'm a polymath, a pain in the ass, a massive pain. Madison is Banquo, Jefferson's Macduff, and Burnham Wood is Congress on its way to Dunsany. And there you are an ocean away. Do you have to live an ocean away? Thoughts of you subside, then I get another letter, and I cannot put the notion away.
Take a break.
I'm on my way.
There's a little surprise before supper, and it cannot wait.
I'll be there in just a minute, save my plate.
Alexander,
Okay.
your son is 9 years old today. He has something he'd like to say. He's been practicing all day. Philip, take it away.
Daddy, look, my name is Philip. I am a poet. I wrote this poem just to show it. And I just turned 9. You can write rhymes, but you can't write mine.
What?
I practice French and play piano with my mother. I have a sister, but I want a little brother.
Okay.
My daddy's trying to start America's bank. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Take a break.
Hey, our kid is pretty great.
Run away with us for the summer. Let's go upstate.
Lies, I've got so much on my plate.
We can all go stay with my father. There's a lake I know in a nearby park.
to go.
You and I can go when the night gets dark.
I will try to get away.
My dearest Alexander, you must get through to Jefferson. Sit down with him and compromise. Don't stop till you agree. Your favorite older sister, Angelica, reminds you there's someone in your corner all the way across the sea. In a letter I received from you 2 weeks ago, I noticed a comma in the middle of a phrase. It changed the meaning. Did you intend this? One stroke and you've consumed my waking days. It says, my dearest Angelica, with a comma after dearest. You've written my dearest Angelica. Anyway, all this to say, I'm coming home this summer at my sister's invitation. I'll be there with your family if you make your way upstate. I know you're very busy, I know your work's important, but I'm crossing the ocean and I just can't wait. You won't be an ocean away, you'll only be a moment away.
Alexander, come downstairs. Angelica's arriving today.
sisters.
Alexander,
Hi.
it's good to see your face.
Angelica, tell this man John Adams spends the summer with his family.
Angelica, tell my wife John Adams doesn't have a real job anyway.
You're not joining us, wait.
I'm afraid I cannot join you upstate.
Alexander, I came all this way.
She came all this way.
All this way, take a break.
No, I have to get my plan through
Run
Congress.
away with us for the summer, let's go
I
upstate.
lose my job if we don't get this plan through Congress.
All go stay with our father. There's a lake I know.
I'll miss your face. Screw your courage to the sticky place. Feel life's right, take a break. Run away with us for the summer, let's go upstate. Where we can stay with our father. If you take your time, you'll make it hard to be alive. Close your eyes and dream when the night gets dark. Take a break.
I have to get my plan through Congress. I can't stop till I get this plan through Congress.
Okay, so Hamilton stays in Philadelphia while his wife Eliza and sister-in-law Angelica go upstate. Now, there was one particular event in 1791 that drove a permanent wedge between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. In that year of 1791, Burr decided to run against Hamilton's father-in-law for the Senate seat from New York. Philip Schuyler was the sitting senator, and he was up for re-election. And Burr, ever the opportunist, he switched parties. He was a Federalist, but he switched to the Democratic Republican Party in order to run for the Senate seat. And Burr defeated Schuyler, and Hamilton never forgave him. And that is the theme of another song in the musical, and that song is called Schuyler Defeated.
Look, Grandpa's in the paper. War hero Philip Schuyler loses Senate seat to young upstart Aaron Burr. Grandpa just lost his seat in the Senate.
Sometimes that's how it goes.
Daddy's gonna find out any minute.
I'm sure he already knows.
Further down, let's meet the newest senator from New York.
New York,
Our
senator.
Burr, since when are you a Democratic Republican?
Since being one put me on the up and up again.
No one knows who you are or what you do.
They don't need to know me, they don't like you.
Excuse me?
On Wall Street thinks you're great. You'll always be adored by the things you create, but upstate,
Wait.
people think you're crooked. And Schuyler's seat was up for grabs, so I took it.
I've always considered you a friend.
I don't see why that has to
You
end.
changed parties to run against my father-in-law.
I changed parties to seize the opportunity I saw. I swear your pride will be the death of us all. Beware, it goeth before the fall.
So Burr defeats Hamilton's father-in-law, and that was just one more ingredient in the antagonism between Burr and Hamilton. Now let's take a look at Hamilton's relationship with Thomas Jefferson. The American Revolution had been a unifying experience for all Americans fighting against a common enemy. But what was postponed was the notion of what the country would be like in the future. And so in the decades after the American Revolution, two distinct and contrary visions arose. One vision promoted by Thomas Jefferson and the other by Alexander Hamilton. They were also the two most powerful men in Washington's cabinet, Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury and Jefferson as Secretary of State. And as members of Washington's cabinet, they became locked in bitter combat. Now, between 1784 and 1789, Jefferson was in Paris, serving as the American minister to France. And when he returned home in 1789, that's when Washington appointed him Secretary of State. And that's the background to the next song in the musical, a song that is quite memorable, and it's called What Did I Miss?
1789. How does the bastard, orphan, immigrant, decorated war vet unite the colonies through more debt? Fight the other founding fathers till he has to forfeit. Have it all, lose it all. You ready for more yet? Treasury Secretary, Washington's the president. Every American experiment sets a precedent. Not so fast, someone came along to resist him. Pissed him off until we had a two-party system. You haven't met him yet, you haven't had the chance, cause he's been kicking ass as the ambassador to France. But someone's gotta keep the American promise. You simply must meet Thomas.
Thomas Jefferson's coming home.
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 Lord, he's been off in Paris for so long.
France is following us to revolution. There is no more status quo. But the sun comes up and the world still spins. I helped Lafayette draft a declaration. Then I said I gotta go. I gotta be in Monticello. Now the work at home begins. So what did I miss? What did I miss? Virginia, my home, sweet home, I wanna give you a kiss. I've been in Paris meeting lots of different ladies. I guess I basically missed the late 80s. I traveled the wide, wide world and came back to this. There's a letter on my desk from the president. Haven't even put my bag down yet. Sally BLM, darling, won't you open it? It says the president's assembling a cabinet, and then I am to be the Secretary of State. Great, and I'm already standing approved. I just got home and now I'm headed up to New York.
Headed to New York, headed to New York.
Looking at the rolling fields, I can't believe that we are free. Ready to face whatever's awaiting me in NYC. But who's waiting for me when I step into place? My friend James Madison, red in the face. He grabs my arm and I respond, what's going on?
Thomas, we are engaged in a battle for our nation's very soul. Can you get us out of the mess we're in? Hamilton's new financial plan is nothing less than government control. I've been fighting for the South alone. Where have you been?
France?
We have to win.
Well, what did I miss?
What did I miss?
What did I miss?
Come home to this.
Head first into a political abyss.
Head first into the abyss.
I had my first cabinet meeting today. I guess I better think of something to say. I'm already on my way to get to the bottom of this.
What did I miss?
Mr. Jefferson, welcome home. Mr. Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. Mr. Jefferson, welcome home.
Mr. Jefferson, welcome home, sir. You've been off in Paris for so long.
So what did I miss?
Jefferson had a very different vision for what the United States should be, a vision that was very different from Hamilton's vision. Jefferson harbored a dream of a pastoral nation of small independent farms. an agrarian democracy composed mostly of farmers, planters, and rural folk. Jefferson also extolled the idea of individual freedom, and he had devout faith in the wisdom of the common man. He said, "Those who labor on the earth are the chosen people of God," as opposed to workers in large cities, which Jefferson regarded as centers of crime, of corruption, and inequity. Jefferson was afraid of a strong central government because he thought that a central government that had too much power would abuse that power. He believed that states' rights should prevail over the power of the federal government. Now, in contrast to Jefferson's vision, Hamilton championed a commercial and industrial America rather than an agrarian America. He promoted the interests of the urban elite, people like merchants and bankers and business leaders, the type of men who rescued him from obscurity when he was an 11-year-old in the Virgin Islands. And as we saw yesterday, his financial plan favored the commercial North rather than the agrarian South. And so Hamilton supported banks, stock exchanges, corporations, factories, cities, all of which Jefferson considered a menace to his idealized rural society. And Hamilton favored a strong central government that could override the power of state governments. And so Jeffersonians wanted a very different type of country than Hamiltonians. They didn't want any of the things that Hamilton wanted for the United States. Moreover, Jefferson regarded Hamilton as overly ambitious, even dangerous. He was convinced that Hamilton secretly wanted to defeat the new Constitution and install a British-type monarchy. Now, one of the ironies of Hamilton's differences with Jefferson was the fact that Jefferson, who owned more than 200 slaves, who lived on a plantation, who got wealthy on the unsalaried labor of slaves, yet most people regarded Jefferson as a man of the people. And Hamilton, who worked for a living, and like the average American, he was painted as the patron of the rich and powerful. Now, although Jefferson accused Hamilton of being an elitist, it was Hamilton who was the quintessential self-made man. He's a guy who comes here as an immigrant with very little. He believes if you work hard, you should rise to the top without any regard for your aristocratic backgrounds. He wanted to transform the United States into a true meritocracy, where men of talent and ability, men like himself, could prosper. Now, the differences between Jefferson and Hamilton also extended into foreign policy. Hamilton felt it was important to maintain good relations with Great Britain because 75% of all American revenues came from trade with England. And so Hamilton's vision of America's economic future was modeled after Britain, the world's leading manufacturing and commercial nation. Hamilton, who always was fearful of mobs and anarchy, was appalled by the violence that occurred with the French Revolution in 1789. Jefferson, on the other hand, had affection for all things French, and he hated Great Britain and the British aristocracy. And so whereas Hamilton opposed the French Revolution, Jefferson supported France and supported the French Revolution. Now, because of these differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, we get the birth of political parties. When the Constitution was written, there were no political parties. But during Washington's administration, those who favored Hamilton called themselves Federalists. Those who favored Jefferson called themselves Democratic Republicans. Now, these conflicting views on foreign policy erupted into a crisis in 1793. Back in 1778, during the American Revolutionary War, America concluded a treaty of alliance with France, and that treaty helped America to defeat Britain. Then in 1789, the French Revolution broke out, and King Louis XVI was deposed. 3 years later, there was a reign of terror in France as the more radical contingent of the French Revolution began to execute any suspected enemies of the French Revolution. In fact, in January of 1793, King Louis XVI himself and his wife, Marie Antoinette, were executed by guillotine. Also in 1793, France was about to go to war with Britain, and the French asked for American assistance. And that really put Washington in a serious dilemma. If the United States supported France, then there was a distinct possibility that we would have to go to war against Britain. And in 1793, we were still a very weak country. But Jefferson pointed out that we had signed a treaty with France back in 1778, and therefore we were obligated to help France in 1793. Hamilton, who favored Britain, thought it would be a disaster if America went to war on France's side in 1793. He argued that the treaty that we signed with France in 1778 was a treaty signed with Louis XVI, not with the French government. And since Louis XVI was dead by 1793, we were no longer obligated to live up to the terms of that treaty. So these are the issues that were addressed in the next song called Cabinet Battle Number 2.
The issue on the table. France is on the verge of war with England. Now, do we provide aid and troops to our French allies, or do we stay out of it? Remember, my decision on this matter is not subject to congressional approval. The only person you have to convince is me. Secretary Jefferson, you have the floor, sir.
When we were on death's door, when we were needy, we made a promise. We signed a treaty. We needed money and guns and half a chance. Who provided those funds?
France.
In return, they didn't ask for land. Only a promise that we'd lend a hand and stand with them if they fought against oppressors. And revolution is messy, but now is the time to stand. Stand with our brothers as they fight against tyranny. I know that Alexander Hamilton is here and he would rather not have this debate. I'll remind you that he is not Secretary of State. He knows nothing of loyalty. Smells like new money, dresses like fake royalty. Desperate to rise above his station. Everything he does betrays the ideals of our nation. Hey, and if you don't know, now you know, Mr. President.
Thank you, Secretary Jefferson. Secretary Hamilton, your response.
Come on. I would love to hear it.
You must be out of your goddamn mind if you think the president is gonna bring the nation to the brink of meddling in the middle of a military mess, a game of chess where France is queen and kingless. We signed a treaty with a king whose head is now in a basket. Would you like to take it out and ask it? Or should we honor our treaty, King Louis's head? Do whatever you want. I'm super dead. Enough. Hamilton is right.
Mr. President.
You're too fragile to start another fight.
But, sir, do we not fight for freedom?
Sure, when the French figure out who's gonna lead them.
The people are leading.
The people are rioting. There's a difference. Frankly, it's a little disquieting. You would let your ideals blind you to reality. Hamilton,
sir,
draft a statement of neutrality.
Did you forget Lafayette?
What?
Have you an ounce of regret? You accumulate debt, you accumulate power, yet in their hour of need you forget.
Lafayette's a smart man. He'll be fine. And before he was your friend, he was mine. If we try to fight in every revolution in the world, we never stop. Where do we draw the line?
So quick-witted.
Alas, I admit it.
I bet you were quite a lawyer.
My defendants got acquitted.
Yeah. Well, someone ought to remind you.
What?
You're nothing without Washington behind you.
Hamilton.
Daddy's calling.
So Washington decides that the United States would remain neutral in this war between Britain and France. Now, as I mentioned, those who followed Hamilton were called Federalists. Those who followed Jefferson were Democratic Republicans. So this chart explains the differences between the first two political parties in American history. Federalists wanted a strong central government, wanted an economy that was based on industry and political power to the wealthy. The Democratic Republicans wanted strong state governments and a country that would favor the common man. The Federalists emphasized manufacturing, shipping, and trade, whereas the Democratic Republican emphasized agriculture. The Federalists favored a loose interpretation of the Constitution. This means that they felt that the central government, the federal government in Washington, should not just have the powers listed in the Constitution, but they should also have powers that are implied, whereas Democratic Republicans favored a weaker central government, and therefore they favored a strict interpretation of the Constitution, meaning that the federal government should have only those powers explicitly stated in the Constitution. The Federalists favored the idea of a national bank. The Democratic Republicans opposed it because there was nothing in the Constitution that gave the federal government the right to establish a national bank. The Federalists favored protective tariffs because they wanted to protect American business. Democratic Republicans opposed the tariff. And finally, the Federalists were pro-British and the Democratic Republicans pro-French. Now, both sides were convinced that the future of the country was at stake. It's important to understand that many people doubted whether the new nation would even survive. It was a period of intense anxiety and fear, and that's why the politics of the day was so dirty. Jefferson and his allies focused all of their energies on opposing Hamilton and his plans. And the differences between Hamilton and Jefferson were not just ideological, they were personal, with almost a pathological intensity. We tend to romanticize the founding fathers, but the fact is they were subject to petty jealousies, partisan squabbling, and deep distrust, particularly of one another. Jefferson regarded Hamilton as a brash, arrogant snob, a bastard immigrant who somehow had the ear of George Washington, and that rankled Jefferson to no end. And the truth is, Hamilton did have a knack for irritating people. He often was out to prove that he was smarter than anyone else. And so he couldn't understand why people didn't just shut up and listen to him. He had very little training in the art of politics as a young man. Others of the revolutionary generation had fathers who were in colonial legislatures, and politics was discussed at the dinner table, and so they learned finesse. Hamilton never had that growing up. Hamilton, on the other hand, regarded Jefferson as a misguided utopian idealist and a hypocrite on the issue of slavery. He ridiculed Jefferson's pseudoscientific conviction that blacks were genetically inferior to whites, and he condemned Jefferson as a coward who spent the Revolutionary War in France while Hamilton fought the British on the battlefield. And the battle between the two parties also spilled out into the streets. In this heightened political culture, the opinions of ordinary people increased in importance. Their passions were inflamed by the appearance of highly partisan newspapers, and each side set out to damn the opposition. During the 1790s, the number of American newspapers doubled. Both Hamilton and Jefferson hired journalists and paid them to attack the ideas of their opponents, vilifying not only their policies, but their very character and reputation. There were all sorts of nasty insinuations about Hamilton's illegitimacy and hints that he was part black. A notorious newspaperman by the name of James Callender reviled Hamilton, describing him as a monarchist toad-eater who has defrauded the public with his corrupt maze of banking and stock speculation. Not sure what a toad-eater is, but it doesn't sound good. A pro-Hamilton newspaper defamed Jefferson as a weakling, a libertine, a coward, son of a half-breed Indian squaw, sired by a mulatto father, and an atheist in league with the devil. And so it was the golden age of literary assassination, so that some of the founding fathers ended up really not just disliking each other, but actually hating each other. Yet, both Hamilton and Jefferson were part of Washington's first cabinet, and they bickered constantly like two kids vying for the affection of Washington, the father of the country. On issue after issue, Washington sided with Hamilton against Jefferson and Madison, and that led Jefferson to conclude that the president's brain had been enfeebled by age. Finally, by 1793, Jefferson had enough and he resigned as Secretary of State. He explained to Washington, quote, "I have utterly disapproved of the system of the Secretary of the Treasury, which Jefferson argued was calculated to undermine and demolish the Republic." And that leads us to the next song in the musical, a song aptly entitled, "Washington on Your Side."
It must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side. It must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side.
Every action has its equal opposite reaction. Thanks to Hamilton, our cabinet's fractured into factions. Try not to crack under the stress, we're breaking down like fractions. We smack each other in the press and we don't print retractions. I get no satisfaction witnessing his fits of passion, the way he primps and preens and dresses like the pits of fashion. Our poorest citizens, our farmers, live ration to ration, as Wall Street robs them blind in search of chips to cash in. This prick is asking for someone to bring him to task. Somebody give me some dirt on his vacuous mask so we can at last unmask him. I'll pull the trigger on him, someone load the gun and cock it. While we were all watching, he got Washington in his pocket.
It must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side. It must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side. Look back at the Bill of Rights, which I wrote. The ink hasn't dried. It must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side.
So he's doubled the size of the government. Wasn't the trouble with much of our previous government size?
Look in his eyes.
See how he lies?
Follow the scent of his enterprise.
Centralizing national credit and making American credit competitive.
If we don't stop it, we aid and abet it.
I have to resign.
Somebody has to stand up for the South.
But somebody has to stand up to his mouth.
If there's a fire you're trying to douse, you can't put it out from inside the house. I'm in the cabinet. I am complicit in watching him grabbing at power and kissing it. Washington isn't gonna listen to disciplined dissidents. This is the difference. This kid is out.
Oh, this immigrant isn't somebody we chose. Oh, this immigrant's keeping us all on our toes. Oh, let's show these federalists who they're up against. Oh, Southern motherfucking Democratic Republicans. Oh, now follow the money and see where it goes. Oh, because every second the treasury grows. Oh, if we follow the money and see where it leads, get in the weeds, look for the seeds of Hamilton's misdeeds. It must be nice, it must be nice.
Follow the money and see where it goes.
It must be nice, it must be nice.
The emperor has no clothes.
We won't be invisible, we won't be denied. Still, it must be nice, it must be nice to have Washington on your side.
Now, having defeated Jefferson with victories over public credit, the assumption of state debts, and a national bank, by the summer of 1791, Hamilton at the age of 36, was at the pinnacle of his career. And it was at that very moment, in one of history's most mystifying cases of bad judgment, that's the way Ron Chernow, Hamilton's biographer, put it, at the peak of his influence, Hamilton began an affair with a married woman. Now, Alexander and Liza had moved to Philadelphia, where Congress had been temporarily meeting. By this time, they had 5 children and apparently a close and affectionate marriage. During the summer of 1791, Hamilton was writing his report on credit to Congress. And that's when, you remember, Liza asked him to go with her to visit her father in New York. Hamilton said that he had to stay in Philadelphia to complete his work. And that summer, when he was alone in Philadelphia, his work was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was a beautiful woman in distress. Her name was Maria Reynolds, and she told Hamilton a woeful tale that her husband had abandoned her, that she didn't have any money, and was there anything he could do to help her? When Hamilton went with her to her boarding house to deliver a bank draft, she ushered him into her bedroom and made it plain that there were other ways she could repay him for his generosity. And he kept going back for 13 months, and she kept repaying him for 13 months. But it was all a trap. Maria Reynolds and her husband, James, had set up the seduction in order to blackmail the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Now, from a blackmailer's perspective, it doesn't get any better than this. Hamilton had a wife, a reputation, and a future in politics to protect. But James and Maria Reynolds were not your common low-life grifters wanting to make a quick buck and run. No, what they had in mind for Hamilton was a long-term financial plan. James suggested that for a flat fee of $1,000, Hamilton could sleep with his wife whenever he wanted. And Hamilton accepted the arrangement. But after Hamilton paid the first $1,000, James Reynolds, of course, continued to ask for more, threatening to reveal the affair to Hamilton's wife. And Hamilton paid the extortion. At times, he had to borrow money to do so. And he continued his tryst with Maria Reynolds even while Liza was pregnant with their 6th child. And that is an introduction to the song that we're going to listen to that is entitled, Say No to This.
There's nothing like summer in the city. Someone under stress meets someone looking pretty. There's trouble in the air, you can smell it. And Alexander's by himself. I'll let him tell it.
I hadn't slept in a week, I was weak, I was awake. You've never seen a bastard orphan more in need of a break. Longing for Angelica, missing my wife. That's when Miss Maria Reynolds walked into my life. She said,
I know you are a man of honor. I'm so sorry to bother you at home, but I don't know where to go, and I came here all alone.
She said,
my husband's doing me wrong, beating me, cheating me, mistreating me. Suddenly he's up and gone. I don't have the means to go on.
So I offered her a loan, I offered to walk her home. She said,
you're too kind, sir.
I gave her $30 that I had socked away. She lived a block away. She said,
this one's mine, sir.
Then I said, well, I should head back home. She turned red, she led me to a bed, let her legs spread and said,
stay.
Hey.
Hey.
That's when I began to pray, Lord, show me how to say no to this. I don't know how to say no to this. Oh my God, she looks so helpless, and her body saying hell yes. No, show me how to say no to this. I don't know how to say no to this. In my mind I'm trying to go. Then her mouth is on mine and I don't say no, no, say no to this. No, no, say I could say that was the last time I said that last time. It became a pastime. A month into this endeavor, I received a letter from a Mr. James Reynolds. Even better, it said,
Dear sir, I hope this letter finds you in good health and in a prosperous enough position to put wealth in the pockets of people like me, down on their luck. You see, that was my wife who you decided to. Uh-oh, you made the wrong sucker a cuckold, so time to pay the piper for the pants you unbuckle. And hey, you can keep seeing my whole wife if the price is right. If not, I'm telling you, your wife.
I hit the letter and I raced to a place, screamed, I'll cut you in the face. She said,
No, sir.
dressed apologetic, a mess. She looked pathetic, she cried.
Please don't go, sir.
So what's your full story? You said,
I don't know about any letters.
Stop crying, goddammit, get up.
I didn't know any better.
I am ruined.
Please don't leave me.
I am helpless. How could I do this?
Just give him what he wants and you can have
I don't
me.
want you.
Whatever he
I don't want
wants,
you.
if you
I
pay, you can stay.
Show me how to say no to this. I don't know how to say no to this, but the situation's helpless.
Help.
And her body's screaming, hell yes. No, show me how to say no to this. How can I say no to this? There is nowhere I can go. When her body's on mine, I do not say no. Yes. Say no to this, I don't say no to this. There is nowhere I can go.
So?
Nobody needs to know.
What ended the affair was not Liza's pregnancy, but rather the threat to Hamilton's career. James Reynolds had a co-swindler by the name of Jacob Klingman, and they were arrested late in 1792 for financial misdeeds. And James Reynolds used his knowledge about Hamilton's affair with his wife in order to bargain his way out of his troubles. When congressmen learned of the blackmail payments, they suspected that Hamilton was using government funds to pay off Reynolds. It was at that point that Hamilton decided to admit the affair to the congressman, but he insisted that he did not use public funds to pay the extortion. And he admitted the affair with the understanding that his confessions would be kept secret. Now, in the musical, the three congressmen whom Hamilton is admitting the affair to were James Madison, Jefferson, and Aaron Burr, but that's not true. They were three different people, including one of whom was James Monroe. So that leads us to the next song in the musical called We Know.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Madison, Senator Burr, what is this?
We have the check stubs from separate accounts.
Almost $1,000 paid in different amounts to a Mr. James Reynolds way back in 1791.
Is that what you have? Are you done?
You are uniquely situated by virtue of your position.
Though virtue is not a word I'd apply to this situation.
To seek financial gain and stray from your sacred mission.
And the evidence suggests you engaged in speculation.
An immigrant embezzling our government funds.
I can almost see the headline, your career is done.
I hope you save some money for your daughter and sons.
Your best one, run back where you come from.
Ha! You don't even know what you're asking me to confess.
Confess.
You have nothing, I don't have to tell you anything at all. Unless if I can prove that I never broke the law, do you promise not to tell another soul what you saw?
No one else was in the room where it happened.
Is that a yes?
Yes. Dear sir, I hope this letter finds you in good health
and in a prosperous enough position to put wealth in the pockets of people like me down on their luck. You see, that was my wife who you decided to.
What?
She courted me, escorted me to bed, and when she had me in a corner, that's when Reynolds extorted me for assorted fee. I paid him quarterly. I may have mortally wounded my prospects, but my papers are orderly. As you can see, I kept a record of every check in my checkered history. Check it again against your list and see consistency. I never spent a cent that wasn't mine. You sent the dogs after my scent, that's fine. Yes, I have reason for shame, but I have not committed treason and sullied my good name. As you can see, I have done nothing to provoke legal action. All my answers to your satisfaction.
My God. Gentlemen, let's go.
So?
The people won't know what we know.
Burr, how do I know you won't use this against me the next time we go toe-to-toe?
Alexander, rumors only grow. And we both know what we know.
Now, the marriage between James and Maria Reynolds did not survive the affair. In 1793, Maria filed for divorce, and she was defended by her lawyer in the divorce proceedings, and her lawyer happened to be Aaron Burr. And that gave Burr a glimpse into the sordid nature of Hamilton's private affairs. Maria then married the same Jacob Clingman, who was her husband's co-conspirator. She married Clingman the very day her divorce became official. The Reynolds affair remained a well-kept secret until 5 years later, when the notorious journalist James Callender publicly charged Hamilton with adultery. Now, evidence suggests that James Monroe, who was one of the congressmen who interviewed Hamilton in 1792, that he leaked documents of the affair to Callender, who then published it. And once again, Hamilton decided to sacrifice his personal reputation in order to preserve his public honor. And that is the theme of the song Hurricane. And in this number, Hamilton looks back on his childhood, trying to find some way out of the mess that he had created for himself.
Of a hurricane, there is quiet for just a moment. A yellow sky. When I was 17, a hurricane destroyed my town. I didn't drown. I couldn't seem to die. I wrote my way out. Wrote everything down far as I could see. I wrote my way out. I looked up and the town had its eyes on me. They passed a plate around, and total strangers moved to kindness by my story. Raised enough for me to book passage on a ship that was New York bound. I wrote my way out of hell. I wrote my way to revolution. I was louder than the crack in the bell. I wrote Eliza love letters until she fell. I wrote about the Constitution and defended it well. And in the face of ignorance and resistance, I wrote financial systems into existence. And when my prayers to God were met with indifference, I picked up a pen. I wrote my own deliverance. In the eye of a hurricane, there is quiet for just a moment. Yellow sky. I was 12 when my mother died. She was holding me. We were sick and she was holding me. I couldn't seem to die. Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. I'll write my way out. Write everything down far as I can see. History has its own. I'll write my way out. Overwhelm them with honesty. hurricane. This is the only way I can protect my legacy.
Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait.
The Reynolds pamphlet.
So Hamilton decided he would admit to the scandal rather than leave the impression that he had misused funds to pay off James Reynolds. And so he wrote a 95-page response to the charge that he had embezzled public funds. This response was called the Reynolds pamphlet. It consisted of 37 pages of personal confessions, including the sordid details about the affair, together with 58 pages of letters and other documents. Hamilton probably thought that the best way to refute the corruption charges was to admit the affair and overwhelm readers with details about it. Now, this Reynolds scandal seriously damaged Hamilton's political stature, but it didn't destroy it. Washington thought that Hamilton was being unfairly persecuted, and Hamilton blamed James Monroe for exposing the affair. Monroe retorted that Hamilton was a scoundrel, and Monroe challenged Hamilton to a duel. And in one of the great ironies of history, that duel between Monroe and Hamilton was averted only by the intercession of none other than Aaron Burr. Now, we don't know exactly how Liza responded when she heard of Hamilton's affair, but we do know that the marriage endured. However, Lin-Manuel Miranda speculates on how Liza must have felt in a song in the musical that is entitled Burn.
I saved every letter you wrote me. From the moment I read them, I knew you were mine. You said you were mine. I thought you were mine. Do you know what Angelica said when we saw your first letter arrive? She said, "Be careful with that one, love. He will do what it takes to survive." You and your words flooded my senses. Your sentences left me defenseless. You built me palaces out of paragraphs. You built cathedrals. I'm rereading the letters you wrote me. I'm searching and scanning for answers in every line, for some kind of sign. And when you were this girl into our bed, in clearing your name, you have ruined our lives. Do you know what Angelica said when she read what you'd done? She said, "You've married an Icarus. He has flown too close to the sun. You and your words obsessed with your legacy. Your sentences border on senseless. You are paranoid in every paragraph, how they deceive you. I'm erasing myself from the narrative. Let future historians wonder how Eliza reacted when you broke her heart. You have torn it all apart. Watching it burn, watching it burn. place in our bed. They don't get to know what I said. I'm burning the memories, burning the letters that might have redeemed you. You forfeit all rights to my heart. You forfeit the place in our bed. You sleep in your office instead, with only the memories of when you were mine. I hope that you
So again, we don't know if this is exactly how Eliza felt, but this is how Lin-Manuel Miranda imagines she must have felt. In November of 1794, Eliza had a miscarriage, for which Hamilton blamed himself, and not just because of the Reynolds fiasco. He thought the demands of public life took him away from his family. He also felt it necessary to rebuild his finances and refurbish his legal practice. And so at the age of 40, Alexander Hamilton resigned from Secretary of the Treasury in January of 1795. But he took comfort in the fact that when he took office in 1789, the nation was bankrupt. And by the time he left government, the United States enjoyed a credit rating that was equal to any other nation. As his biographer Ron Chernow puts it, if Washington was the father of the country and Madison was the father of the Constitution, then Alexander Hamilton was surely the father of the American government. But although he was out of office, he remained engaged in the political battles of the day. He supported an unpopular agreement between the United States and Great Britain, known as the Jay Treaty. This treaty aroused the fury of pro-French Jeffersonians. Without the strong restraining hand of Washington, Hamilton's temper got the better of him. In supporting the Jay Treaty, he threatened his opponents with fisticuffs and challenged their manhood. He made the conflict intensely personal. And so the man who created a structure for law and justice in American society was now mired in the old-fashioned world of blood feuds. There's no doubt that if Hamilton were alive today, he would be continuously tweeting insults at his political opponents. As a private citizen, he became a leader of the movement to advocate for rights for African Americans, founding the first anti-slavery society in New York City, called the Manumission Society. He also co-founded an opposition newspaper, the New York Evening Post, in order to promote Federalist causes. That newspaper remains today as one of 3 daily newspapers in New York. It's called the New York Post. And while it was not acknowledged at the time, Hamilton also crafted George Washington's farewell address when Washington announced that he would not run for re-election in 1796. And now we're going to listen to a song sung by King George III about the president who succeeded George Washington, John Adams.
They say George Washington's yielding his power and stepping away. Is that true? I wasn't aware that was something a person could do. I'm perplexed. Are they going to keep on replacing whoever's in charge? If so, who's next? There's nobody else in their country who looms quite as large. John Adams? I know him. That can't be. That's that little guy who spoke to me all those years ago. What was it? 85? That poor man, they're going to eat him alive. Oceans rise, empires fall. Next to Washington, they all look small. All alone, watch them run. They will tear each other into pieces. Jesus Christ, this will be fun. Da 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 da. President John Adams. Good luck.
Now, some people wondered why Hamilton never decided to run for president after Washington left office. Although he wasn't a natural-born citizen, the Constitution did state that someone who was a citizen at the time of the adoption of the Constitution would be eligible for the presidency. But as the most outspoken member of the Federalist Party, Hamilton knew that his candidacy would be too controversial, too divisive, to say nothing of the lingering stain of the Reynolds affair. The leading Federalist candidate in the 1796 election was John Adams, but also Charles Pinckney was a rival to John Adams in the 1796 election, and Hamilton decided to support Pinckney. Hamilton compared Adams unfavorably with Washington. He thought that Adams was too emotionally unstable to be president. But by backing the wrong horse, Hamilton made an enemy of Adams, and that would haunt Hamilton for the rest of his career. Both Adams and Hamilton were erratic and impulsive, and they were particularly adept at hurling insults and invectives at each other. And so, for example, the newly elected second president of the United States vilified Hamilton as a great hypocrite, a Creole bastard. With the Reynolds affair in mind, Adams ridiculed Hamilton's debauched morals. He also intimated that Hamilton's eloquence was the result of his use of opium. And Adams insinuated that Hamilton was a secret ally of Great Britain and therefore a traitor to his country. Hamilton, in turn, accused Adams of being unbalanced, someone with a disgusting egotism, with vanity without bounds, and an ungovernable temper. Now remember, both Hamilton and Adams are from the same political party, so this is extraordinary. When Adams was vice president under Washington, Washington excluded Adams from his inner circle. But now that Adams won the 1796 election, Hamilton, who once had complete access to Washington, now he was ostracized and isolated by President Adams. And that brings us to the next song in the musical that is entitled President Adams. And
How does Hamilton, the short-tempered protean creator of the Coast Guard, founder of the New York Post, ardently abuse his cabinet post, destroy his reputation? Welcome, folks, to the Adams administration. Jefferson's the runner-up, which makes him the vice president.
Washington can't help you now, no more Mr. Nice President.
Adams fires Hamilton, privately calls him Creole bastard in his taunts.
Say what?
Hamilton publishes his response.
Sit down, John, you fat mother.
Hamilton's out of control.
This is great. He's out of power, he holds no office, and he just destroyed President John Adams, the only other significant member of his party.
Hamilton is a host unto himself. As long as he can hold a pen, he's a threat. Let's let him know what we know.
now, the lyrics say that Adams fired Hamilton. That's not true. Hamilton had resigned as Secretary of the Treasury during Washington's administration. Now, Hamilton was clearly frustrated that he no longer held the levers of power. When Washington died in 1796, Hamilton lost his patron and his protector, and that further made him an outcast during the Adams presidency. Once he was no longer under Washington's guidance, Hamilton's judgment became increasingly erratic. He became his own worst enemy, building a reputation as a man who had no discretion, a guy who doesn't know when to shut up, literally a loose cannon. Hamilton found it hard to refrain from vendettas. He made his feud with Adams more public by publishing Letter from Alexander Hamilton concerning the public conduct and character of John Adams. And this contained vitriolic attacks on the sitting president. In essence, Hamilton was committing political suicide. As with the Reynolds pamphlet, Hamilton's scathing letter about Adams became a self-inflicted wound that blighted the remainder of Hamilton's career. Many people began to believe that Hamilton was becoming unfit to lead the Federalist Party. The infighting between Hamilton and John Adams had a devastating long-term effect. Their mutual hatred split the Federalist Party, and after 1800, the Federalist Party would never hold national power again. Now, the Adams presidency lasted from 1797 to 1801, and it really marked a critical period in American history when the nation was swept by an atmosphere of fear, suspicion, intrigue, and internal conflict. The hostility within the Hamilton and Adams wings of the Federalist Party was matched by the political savagery on the part of the Democratic Republican Party. The acrimony was symbolized by an incident that took place on the floor of Congress in 1797, when a Republican from Vermont by the name of Matt Lyon mocked the aristocratic sympathies of a Federalist by the name of Roger Griswold. Griswold then accused Lyon of cowardice during the American Revolution, whereupon Lyon spat in Griswold's face. And then on the floor of Congress, Griswold attacked Lyon with a hickory cane, and the two wrestled on the floor while Lyon began beating Griswold with a pair of fire tongues. So if you think political debate today is acrimonious, it's nothing compared to what was going on in 1800. It was against this backdrop that the Federalists managed to enact a legislative program designed to cripple, if not destroy, Jefferson's Democratic Republican Party. Since most immigrants voted Republican, the Federalist-dominated Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which empowered the president to seize, detain, and deport any non-citizen that the president deemed dangerous to the United States. As a loyal Federalist, Hamilton, America's most famous foreign-born citizen, wanted to stop the flow of immigration into the United States because, as I said, immigrants tended to vote for Jefferson's party. And so Hamilton supported this law. The mass of aliens ought to be obliged to leave the country, said Alexander Hamilton, ironically himself an immigrant. And like many immigrants before him, Hamilton reinvented himself by coming to America seeking to repudiate his past, never looking back. Hamilton was still outraged by the incessant attacks on him in the press, so he supported a Sedition Act that said that if any person shall write, print, utter, or publish any false, scandalous, and malicious writing or writings against the government of the United States, then such person shall be punished by a fine not exceeding $2,000 and by imprisonment not exceeding 2 years. Now, this is a clear violation of freedom of expression in the First Amendment. But the Sedition Act was passed and intended to stop any criticism of the Adams administration. And it was as a result of this pernicious law that Congressman Matthew Lyon was sentenced to 4 months in jail and fined for criticizing President Adams. Luther Baldwin was a private citizen, and he was indicted under this law for a comment that he made when President Adams was visiting Newark, New Jersey. The president was greeted by a crowd and then by a committee that saluted him by firing a cannon. A bystander said, "There goes the president, and they are firing at his ass." Luther Baldwin replied that he didn't care, quote, if they fired through his ass. And for that, he was convicted in the federal court for speaking seditious words tending to defame the president and government of the United States. So again, the Alien and Sedition Acts were a clear violation of the First Amendment, and its enactment was yet another indication of the heightened political tensions in America at the end of the 18th century. So I'm going to stop here to take a look at the